In a meeting with Hungarian President Viktor Orban, Donald Trump has released his plan for ending the Ukraine war, and it's about as sophisticated as you think. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So, first off, as always, I do like to talk about the frontline updates because it's another day of no updates. And the Russian claims that Ukrainian forces, again, were going to collapse and that this was the hour of great Russian victory seems to have been largely overblown. Russian forces stuck behind the river outside of Avdiivka, and of course, there's not really anything left for them to encircle, making things just a little tougher. You can see they're still trying to cut off this town of Tonenka, but we talked about the fact that it may be bad news that Russia was crossing this small river here. But again, it's not clear that Tonenka is actually the anchor to the Ukrainian front lines, and it's not even clear that this is a decisive thrust by Russian forces, cutting off Ukrainians from Tonenka. I still wouldn't be shocked if they end up driven back across this line, given that Ukraine still definitely possesses the capacity to launch these small localized attacks, even when they're trying to conserve ammunition and resources as much as they are. The only real, and calling it substantive is kind of generous here, is outside this town of Shevchenko, where you're seeing a larger area listed as contested. But again, weigh the terrain you're seeing based on its military weight. That seems to be more of a Syrskyi thing, I've noticed, with the new commander in charge of Ukrainian armed forces. Syrskyi, he seems willing to sit there and say, okay, what terrain is worth defending, and then what terrain is worth sacrificing, which is something that Russia seems to not really believe. Russia seems to have an idea that terrain for terrain's sake, seizing any land is as good as any other land. So seeing Ukrainian forces yield farmland to pull Russian forces into a fight they can't win, or to reposition themselves into more defensible territory, all seems like very much a newer pivot for Ukrainian forces. So I would expect that, again, I wouldn't even be shocked if you told me that Ukrainians ultimately planned on using this river here, the Kashkalak, as a sort of de facto front line, or that they're planning some kind of defense in depth like this. But this isn't the story you're here for. You're not here for the frontline updates. But again, I think it's important. You're here to hear about Trump's meeting with Viktor Orban. And this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. First off, Trump is not the president. He's a private citizen. And that means that he can meet with whoever he wants. But it's also a little strange given that diplomacy is the job of the person in the White House, and Trump isn't actually the person in the White House, if that makes sense. And oftentimes meeting with a sitting U.S. president is seen as a huge endorsement, right? And Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is kind of a notorious figure for a couple of reasons. Most notably that he has been the nicest way to put it is that he has become a very authoritarian leader. You can see he has been they're calling premier for the last 12 years, which is quite a long time. And you can see here they're referring to it as democratic backsliding and authoritarianism. It says between 2010 and 2020, Hungary dropped 69 places on the Freedom of Press Index, lost 11 places in the Democracy Index, deteriorated 16 places in the Corruption Perception Index. And in 2019, Freedom House downgraded the country from free to partly free. Right. Other sources rank Hungary very low on the Electoral Democracy Index, which rates whether elections are free and fair, as well as the presence of a free and independent media, sitting between Benin, which is a West African country, and Malaysia, a country in the South China Sea. And so the issue is, of course, that the Orban is seen as somebody who, if a U.S. presidential candidate looks up to, that itself is kind of problematic, right? You can see that in April 2022, Orban's party won about 54% of the vote, which is about the same as he won when he got into office, 52%. So he hasn't become more popular, but because of gerrymandering and, quote, other tweaks to Hungarian electoral rules, he ended up winning 83% of the districts. Orban also passed laws and amended the Hungarian constitution, hollowing out civic institutions like courts, universities, and the apparatus necessary for free elections that are controlled by Orban loyalists. This is replacing a checks and balances system within the Hungarian government with one in which all power is centralized at Orban, and he's able to install loyalists into a lot of those roles. And of course, the fact that public media is sort of dominated by Orban himself means that most of the public don't actually even hear those criticisms. So it's a very modern version of authoritarianism. In 2022, Orban's opponent, for example, was allotted just 5 minutes on the national television station to make his case to voters. That's little more than a tweet. But this is kind of the fear when you see someone like Trump endorsing a person like this. You ask, okay, is he taking notes, or is he trying to take someone who has been one of the most stubborn voices against European aid to the Ukrainians and trying to like bring the dude into the fold, right? Is he having a come to Jesus meeting? Like, hey, you have to restore free and fair elections, which is a fair diplomatic strategy. Like, that's a real diplomatic strategy. Or is Trump just endorsing this guy wholesale? And it's kind of worrying because it seems like the answer is he's pretty fawning over the guy. But here's what's also worrying is that Orban came out and said Trump has quite detailed plans on how to end the Russo-Ukrainian war. And conveniently, his plan aligns with Hungary's interests, right? The quote from Orban is, he, referring to Trump, has a clear vision that's hard to disagree with. He says the following: first, he will not give a single penny for the Russo-Ukrainian war. And that's why the war will end, because it's obvious Ukraine cannot stand on its own 2 feet. If the Americans don't give money and weapons along with the Europeans, the war will end. And if the Americans don't give money, then the Europeans won't be able to fund this war alone, and the war will end. Now, here's the thing, guys. You may notice that Trump's strategy is not to negotiate a peace. It's to cripple one side. It's to strike a blow on behalf of Russia, to do what Russia could not do, which is eliminate Ukraine's ability to supply its troops. So this is sort of like saying we're going to find a negotiated peace between a bully and their victim by allowing the bully to beat the victim unconscious. Then you say, listen, the fight's over. We have successfully ended this ongoing fight between a bully and their victim, right? And it's true. That's technically correct. And of course, when Orban sits there and goes, this perfectly aligns with Hungarian interests, it's a sign that Orban believes a Russian victory is good for Hungary, which is sort of strange because, again, Hungary is kind of on Russia's chopping block, right? And I thought it was interesting. Orban said that the U.S. does not want to fund Europe's security, which I think is fair. He says, quote, if the Europeans are afraid of the Russians or want to have a high level of security in general, they have to pay for it, either by building their own army and their own equipment, or if they use the Americans for this, by paying the Americans the price of security. So Trump is speaking directly and clearly, Orban said. Orban also noted that Trump is the first president in a long time who did not start a war during his term of office. I think, I give credit where credit's due. I think that's good. I think more presidents could stand to be a little more discretionary with the use of the U.S. military. And if your goal was to end the Russo-Ukrainian war as fast as possible, like that is the strategy you would employ. The catch is that it involves screwing one of your allies. Again, this is like saying that, the easiest way to deal with someone who's breaking into your house and robbing it, the fastest way to resolve the issue is just give them the house, right? Like, it's true. It's true. There's no calling the cops. There's no court case, nothing. You say, you broke into my house. You just said it's yours. I'm leaving. It's your house. Congratulations, right? And the only problem is the little pesky case of, one, justice, right? The notion. Two, though, if you live in a society, if you live in a neighborhood where whoever breaks into whoever's house gets to keep it, that's going to create ripple effects, right? You're homeless, but what you have is a strategy to get a new house really quickly, right? And that's what's going to happen is anyone who has the capacity to seize contested territory is going to sit there and go, hey, man, China, the other major there's 3 major powers militarily in the world. Russia, who is literally actively annexing territories they want. China, who has said, we really want to annex these territories that we want, and we really don't have a special interest in policing other states' behavior. And then you have the United States, who says, listen, if you're a U.S. friend, we don't allow you to just invade countries at random, big or small. You cannot just run roughshod over countries that are not your own, over other sovereign nations. And the problem is that if countries no longer believe that, then large countries will do anything they want, and small countries are just going to get screwed. And it's troubling because in a lot of cases, those big countries, right, once you create that rule set of the international order is just pure chaos, right? Then the logical follow through is that the rest of the international order, right? The other things like, for example, you shouldn't clear out the ethnicities you don't like in newly conquered territory. Well, who's going to enforce that? If you won't even say that other countries have a right to basically exist, and I understand that like America can't be world police, but that's not what we're doing here. Right? We're loaning a country some of our spares. Sorry, we're giving a country some of our spares and about 5% of our defense budget in exchange for destroying the military of a competitor and ensuring and telling the whole world, hey, listen, if you're a U.S. ally, and whether it's a staunch NATO member or just someone who is a collaborator and coordinator, like we're going to go to bat for you in some capacity if you get screwed by your bully neighbor. And again, Taiwan's looking at this, taking notes. Every other country with a conflict with their neighbor is taking notes, right? The Kuwaitis taking notes. Everybody is looking at this and being like, okay, what does it mean to be the friend of the United States? And again, it's hard to see articles like this, to see the U.S. president or potential U.S. president, or former U.S. president, endorse a guy like Viktor Orban and operate in a way that makes it look like the U.S. being friends with the U.S. doesn't mean anything, right? Like a U.S. alliance doesn't mean anything. Anyway, guys, be sure, of course, if you need the energy to make it through your day, right, you want to check out some Strike Gum. Strike Gum has 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece. That's as much as an energy drink, but 0 sugar. And if you are interested, right, go to strikegum.com. We have military discounts. We have new customer discounts. We have a ton of discounts. So thank you guys so much. And a huge thank you to all the members of combatvetnews.com. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. It tells the YouTube algorithm that I make good quality content. See ya.